I'd like to introduce Ginger Vieira. She is one of my heroes and has helped me so much over the years. I just have so much gratitude and appreciation for her. Ginger has lived with type 1 diabetes and celiac disease since 1999 and fibromyalgia since 2014. She's the author of several books available on Amazon, including Pregnancy with Diabetes, Dealing with Diabetes Burnout, Emotional Eating with Diabetes, two more books for kids, When I Go Low and Ain't Gonna Hide My T1D. And today we're going to be talking about her newest book, Exercise with Type 1 Diabetes. Ginger, welcome and thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Scott. Thank you for the intro.
So this book is great, and I think people can tell by when I hold it up, but it is super concise, very digestible, very quick.
Mm.
But this is one of your skills, Ginger, is you have this gift of being able to take a complicated topic, which is complicated for many reasons, right? Exercise by itself is complicated. Diabetes by itself is complicated, but exercising with diabetes, it can be so challenging. Talk a little bit about why
Yeah,
that is. It
yeah,
is a mess. You're right.
yeah. I mean, it's so crazy, right? Because we take constant injections of this hormone that drives blood sugar down, and we need it. Otherwise, we die. But a teensy bit too much, then you also die. And then if you add a dog walk to it, it drives blood sugar down way too much. But if you're lifting really heavy weights in a CrossFit workout, your blood sugar goes up. And like that's just a glimpse at the physiology of exercise that affects blood sugar. And so, because we don't manage our own insulin production, because it's not automatic the way it's supposed to be, we're adding this huge it's like adding gasoline to a fire when you exercise and you have insulin on board. And it's really complicated and really scary. I can't tell you how often I hear from people just saying like, "How are you doing this?" in
Hmm.
response to an Instagram reel where I'm exercising. "How are you doing this? I'm so scared to even go on a walk with my kids."
Right.
And, I don't want people to feel that way because there are things you can learn so that you don't feel so scared and that you have more ability to predict what's gonna happen and prevent and control what's gonna happen, right?
Hmm. Hmm. I remember one of my endocrinologists many years back. He said that exercise, like it creates so many variables and challenges in diabetes management that it's just really complicated and challenging. But there's the benefits of exercise for diabetes, but also just for overall health they're so great that it outweighs all of those challenges. Although I've certainly gone through times where I'm just like, I can't figure it out. I'm just going to stop and pull back from it. It's a challenge,
Mm.
big time.
And do you mean you pull back in general from the daily habit or you're pulling back that day? You have,
Um,
like, gaps of time where you're
I
pulling
think
back?
that I go through periods where I would get overwhelmed by the complexity of exercise and just decide not to exercise, and then that can
Mhm.
develop into a like this long-term rut of not moving
Yeah,
enough, right? But then,
yeah. And I think that's really common.
yeah, I think
I
so
hear
too.
that from people.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
And you said a big word, which is variables, like,
Yeah,
there's insulin, but there's different types of insulin. There's basal insulin, there's insulin you took for a meal, insulin you took to correct a high, there's the timing of when you work out, what you ate before, what you ate 2 hours before, insulin you took 4 hours before versus 1 hour before,
yeah,
disconnecting from your pump or keeping it on and setting, like, an extremely restricted basal rate. Or maybe that's not gonna work because you're doing strength training and your blood sugar is going to spike and you actually need more insulin during your workout. Like it is a mess. And
yeah,
when you explain even like 8 seconds of that to a non diabetic, they're like, what?
yeah,
A non diabetic woman said to me, like, well, you don't know what it's like to have to try to do this in your 60s or something. And I was like, "Okay." And I was like, believe me, I know the challenges of exercising at any age.
yes,
Yeah.
right. Well, so with that in mind, you've got all of this complicated material. How on earth did you approach breaking this down for your book? Like, what was your game plan in putting the topics together and how?
Okay. I love taking a pile of information, like a big old mess, and breaking it down so that I know my friends will be able to learn it in a way that isn't stressful.
Mhm.
And it starts with, like, before you even head out the door for your dog walk, it starts with understanding these teeny details about insulin management that are so important. So I like to always make sure I'm starting at, like, ground zero without going too far back, right? Like, we
Yeah,
can't start at everything diabetes because then too many people wouldn't get what they really need halfway through. Um, but I write articles about this all the time, and I can't fit it all in one article, and I can't fit it all in an Instagram reel, right?
yeah,
And people tell me what they're frustrated with all the time, so I know what the challenges are. I live with it. I know what the challenges are there too, right?
yeah,
And so I've known for a while, like, I need to put this into one book, and so I let the book idea simmer until I'm ready to pump it out, and I wrote most of this in about a week and a half.
wow,
And I wasn't working at the time, I was
yeah,
between jobs, and so I was like, "Alright, every day I'm gonna try to write a whole chapter," and I think about what's in here all the time, and I've written about it so much, and I've explained it so much verbally in presentations at events that it was all already in my head. I didn't have to do much research. I just
yeah,
needed to pump it out.
yeah. But you also manage to pump it out in a way that is very concise and digestible, and the path through the book feels very natural and just makes sense. So,
Good.
this book is less than 100. It's about what?
It's 80
5?
pages.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which
I mean, well, the reason I do that is because I actually am very impatient.
Mhm.
And so I don't want to read a 200-page book.
Right.
And I know you don't want to read a 200-page
Yeah.
book. I want to give people exactly what they know without all the dramatic fluff that if I went to a publisher, they wouldn't publish this. It's too short.
Mhm.
They'd want some huge thing on the history of exercise and, all this other stuff that people don't need. They need
Right.
the nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanna give you is no nonsense.
I mean, that's what you've done. This is something you can sit down and read in a pleasurable afternoon, like, not even an
Yeah,
afternoon,
yeah.
th
You might be really tired. I'd recommend a few afternoons, but but not too many. It's a lot of science in
but not too much, right? It's a really great balance of the science that you need, but not too much.
yeah.
And that I
Thank
think that's one of your gifts that you bring to the diabetes space and I would imagine any space you decide to teach in, but, that balance of complicated information and the science behind it, but presented in a way that's very digestible. So, bravo to
thank you.
you with that for sure. It's,
Thank you.
you mentioned in your, in the back of the book, wrestling with fibromyalgia too. And I remember when you went through that and you had to change how you exercised a lot around that, right? Can you tell us a little more about that?
Mm, everything. Yeah, I mean, I basically while I was in the midst of setting records in powerlifting, I started getting pretty irrational pain in gradually every joint, and a doctor would say, "Well, you lift heavy weights. That's what's wrong with you." But it didn't make sense, and
Yeah.
I hadn't been lifting weights for decades, right? Like, it's only a few years. It shouldn't have been happening like that, and it was getting to the point where I actually stopped all weightlifting because I was in so much pain, and even after stopping, I could not lift the pot off the stove because the
Mm,
muscles in my hand were spasming so intensely. I couldn't turn my head, like, more than this because my neck muscles were spasming so intensely. So I was having, like, full body muscle spasms. I finally, after firing a few doctors, got a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. I took muscle relaxants at a low dose for quite a while, and I stopped all intense exercise. I really just walked my dog for I'm not sure now exactly how 1 year or 2 years 3 dogs, by the way. I was walking a lot of dogs, um, but I just decided I'm gonna let whatever's going on calm down and it did help, but then I had to gradually rebuild my tolerance for exercise. So
mhm.
even if I could endure the physical part of it without too much pain, I would be exhausted if I did anything that produced any type of that fun exertion of exercise, even at like just a normal level.
Yeah.
Like right now, my body is very, so now we're 10 years later, right? I do not lift heavy weights because I know lactic acid for some reason is like poison that gives me extreme exhaustion
Mm,
and I can't get it to go away. I have been able to rebuild my tolerance for some weightlifting by lifting 5-pound dumbbells for a year
mhm.
and then upping it to 8 pounds, like really, really patient. So
Yeah.
I should give myself more credit when I say I'm not a very patient person. I make up for it by being extremely persistent, right?
Yeah.
And right now, for some reason, and I still can't figure out why, I can't tolerate even the lightest weightlifting workouts. So every other night, I'm doing just 3 sets of 1 weightlifting exercise, and I'm doing it at night because then I am going to bed later, so the exhaustion hits while I'm already asleep. If I
Sure.
do it in the morning, I'm exhausted at 2 p.m.
Yeah.
So it's figuring out problem solving, right? Which is what I love to do,
Uh-huh.
and eventually I'll put it in a book. But I do fibromyalgia is messier, not everyone's experience is the same.
Right.
So it's hard to write resources for people on that.
Yeah. Well, I imagine that it was also, aside from figuring out all the, how to adapt your exercise and all that, like you mentioned, you were in a phase of like really intense exercise and then to have to stop,
Yeah.
talk about the mental aspect of that a little bit.
I mean, what I really learned from that was how attached my ego was to succeeding or accomplishing something every day in the gym.
Hmm.
And it was actually like so freeing to not care anymore. Like
Wow.
eventually, right? I went
Yeah.
through a phase of really missing it. And eventually I was like, oh, I don't need that to like be awesome today. And
Hmm.
I still have friends from the lifting world and I listen to them talk about their PRs and they're so obsessed. And like, you don't need that. I don't say that, right? Because that's
Yeah.
their world. But it's interesting. And so today, instead, I get my kind of enthusiasm for exercise from being really gentle to myself. So I can run 3 miles a day on a treadmill. But if I were to take that and go outside, then it's running outside is so much more work for your
Okay.
body, right? Because you're pushing yourself forward. Then I'll be exhausted. So I always have to, anytime I change what I'm doing, I got to start small and like introduce my body to it and gradually increase the duration or the intensity. So
Yeah.
it's this level of patience, but also this new mindset of not pushing myself. I'm finding the level that's like comfortable and kind to my body. It's, it's a whole different type of challenge in the
Sure.
gym.
And I would
Yeah.
say that demonstrates, an immense amount of patience, Ginger. You,
Yes, yes.
especially being a record-setting athlete who at that time was probably just kinda go, 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 and very
Yeah,
intense
push,
to have.
push, push, right?
Mhm. Yep,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
and I cannot push past, even to a level of intensity or
Mhm.
I'll pay for it later, and I do not like that exhaustion. I don't have time to be tired,
Yeah.
and right? So, I can maintain a high level energy throughout the day if I'm really kind to myself in the gym, which is just such a funny life
Yeah.
lesson.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
right, it is. I think there's lessons in learning to be kind to yourself in the gym that also apply to diabetes. I think we beat ourselves up over our diabetes way too often without recognizing, the
yeah.
difficulty in the job we've been given and how well we actually do that most days.
Yeah, I mean, it is crazy if I think most of us don't stop and really look at what we're juggling all day.
Mhm.
And if you were to stop and look at that a little more, you wouldn't beat yourself up for the blood sugar excursions,
Right.
that go beyond that little green range on your CGM. It's like, of course it's going beyond that. I also really love talking lately about, and I include this in the book too, that we always talk about the fact that we don't produce insulin properly, but there's actually 5 other hormones that we don't produce properly.
Wow. Yeah.
And they're not life threatening and we still produce enough, right? That nobody is like alarmed and terrified about it. You're not in the ER because of it, but they manage all these things, including how much sugar your liver makes, how hungry you feel, all these things that help you manage your appetite, your weight, your insulin sensitivity, your blood sugar. And we're not given the tools for that. and things like, that are making the news, things like Ozempic and Mounjaro and Trulicity and even metformin, like they
Mhm.
address those other things, but it's still pushing the boundary for type 1 to be taking any of them.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, many, many years ago, I started using some of those, additional, tools. So, um, even way back when Simlin was around, right?
I
So
remember when you were on Finland.
mhm,
Yeah,
and it was
it
very
was new.
it was new, and but the thing I remember most about it is that I could clearly feel that wow, this is something that I've been missing, right? Like it just affected the way I felt in so many different ways, and I've
Yeah,
extended that as those families of additional medications have evolved. I've continued to kind of hit my diabetes from every side I can,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
think it
I
helped.
take tiny dose of Ozempic and I take metformin as well,
Mhm.
and both are just so helpful for just trying to be a human being,
Yeah,
frankly.
yeah, and it's interesting because, like you say, I think if I were to miss a dose of any of those tools, I'm not gonna land in the hospital, but I
Right.
definitely see a difference in my blood sugars, and I also feel a difference in,
Yeah,
the everyday kinda non the people without diabetes, how they feel versus how I might feel without some of those tools. So I think it's
yeah. Oh, I'd notice it for sure in a day, even just if I missed my metformin dose, and metformin is kinda dismissed as this really old drug, but
Mhm.
I find it so helpful. So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
agree. I mean, and the good things about that, it's an old drug, which means it's very safe and it's also very cheap. So
yeah.
there are some good things. Well, Ginger, if you were to talk to somebody who comes and says, "Hey, gosh, I'm just so overwhelmed by exercise. I don't know where to start. I've lived with diabetes for a while. I'm doing pretty good there, but anytime I mix in some exercise, uh, it turns into this hot
Bring it.
mess." Yeah.
Yeah. The first thing I would talk to anybody about is their basal insulin, and it is the last thing most people think about because
Mm,
most of us have been put on a basal dose by our healthcare team, and it hasn't changed in years. And depending on how much insulin you're on, so if someone's on 35 units of long-acting insulin a day or 35 units of basal insulin a day, a a change of 1 unit isn't gonna
right.
they're not gonna notice that, right? For me, I'm on about 10 units of long-acting a day, so a change of 1 unit is noticeable to me. So it's that percentage, right? It's about
Yeah.
10%. Most people are on too much basal insulin. If they I was recently in this, chat group of women with type 1, and they were talking about how just vacuuming the house makes their blood sugar
Mm,
crash like crazy,
yeah.
and, it's nothing they did seem to be able to prevent it. You're on too much basal insulin. And so the goal, and this needs to be combined with being consistent about exercise. If you're only going to work out once a week, then this is going to be a mess,
Yeah.
right? So definitely exercise every day. But here's another reason why. If you can get your long acting, your basal rates down to the amount that keeps you close to your target range, then you're adding mealtime insulin on top of that. So you don't really want your basal insulin to keep you at 100
Mhm.
because as soon as you add all the mealtime insulin on top of it, or a walk, you're just going to crash like crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would start by looking at your basal insulin, and I would guess that you're on way too much.
K
Mm,
Talk a
Go
little bit
ahead.
about, insulin on board and how you can leverage exercising in a fasted state to help
That's
with
my
some of that.
favorite thing, Scott. How do you know? Of course you know. Uh, Scott and I have talked a lot about fasted exercise over the years. So fasted exercise can be combined with intermittent fasting or not intermittent fasting. It's just about the timing of exercising before you eat instead of the age-old advice that really made sense 15 years ago and it doesn't make sense today to exercise after you eat.
Mhm.
And the reason you wanna do this is because if you exercise before you eat, you didn't just take a big bolus of insulin for the carbs and the protein and the fat in your meal, and so you don't have all that insulin on board to tank you if you try to exercise within the 4 to 5-hour window after eating. So, for example, I like to exercise at the moment, I exercise first thing in the morning. I walk about 45 minutes with my dog and my husband, and then get my kids to school, and then I go to the gym or I run outside. I live in Vermont. It all depends on time of year. And then I get my cardio, and I do all of that without having eaten. I also save my coffee for afterwards, but that's mostly because it would make me have to pee every 20 minutes. Oh, but that's a different problem. Um, but without having all that mealtime insulin on board, I don't have to worry about crashing. Instead, I have to keep an eye on my blood sugar rising because I didn't eat. My liver is going to eventually give me some glucose because I didn't eat. And that's just the body doing what it does, whether you have diabetes or not. So I do around 8 a.m. keep an eye on that rising level. And I always wait to see it starting to rise because some days it just doesn't.
Yeah.
Especially if like maybe the day before I got a lot of exercise and I didn't eat and as much as I might, like whatever might have made me extra sensitive.
Yep.
So then I take like a half unit of Novolog to cover that glucose from my liver. And then I continue with my exercise. So I have my long acting dose boiled down as much as I can to, if I know that if I start going low during fasted exercise, I have too much Lantus on board. But all right, let's say you don't like exercising first thing in the morning. When my children were really young, my exercise window, I walked my dogs obviously earlier, but my intense exercise window was 7 p.m. So I would make sure after they went to bed. So I would make sure not to eat after 4 p.m. That'd be my last snack. I'd exercise. I was jumping rope a lot back then. So it was jump rope, 30, 40 minutes in the garage, and then I'd eat dinner after that.
Mhm.
And so it's, those are just two examples. Everybody's life is different. You got to figure out that. But it's really valuable to me to micromanage the scheduling of that in order to be able to exercise as much as I want and enjoy it and not have to eat lots of jelly beans just to get through it, which is
Yeah.
not fun and ruins everything about it.
Yeah. Now, I mean, jelly beans are pretty delicious, but you want to have them when you want to have them, not
When you're dying.
when
Yeah.
you're
I'd
sitting down.
rather eat them, yeah, after dinner.
I've leveraged exercising in a fasted state as well, and for me, it just reduces that problem of dropping too low because of insulin on board. I mean, there's the insulin we take, it hangs around for, it feels like a very, very long time. And even having just a little bit, when you exercise, it feels to me like it really supercharges that insulin. Um, and if I have eaten with insulin prior, it makes too many variables. So
Yeah. It also actually, so what are you using for fuel if you're not burning up all the glucose? You're burning more body fat
mhm,
for fuel. So it also can help accelerate weight loss too.
yeah,
I also use inhaled insulin, which has a much shorter action
right.
time. It sticks around in your body significantly less. So the smaller dose is out of my system after about an hour.
Wow.
And the larger dose is like the bigger window of it is 2 hours. So I stop worrying about it after 2 hours. So that gives me even more flexibility on top of fasted because I know I can eat lunch at 12 o'clock, walk my dog at 1, and depending on what I had for lunch, if it was really low carb and I only took a small dose of Afrezza, I just let the walk, burn off anything
Mhm.
else that might be digesting from that salad.
Yeah, that's a great tool. When I think about exercise, I think I often fall into the mistake of picturing like, oh, I got to drive to the gym. I need to change clothes. I need to have this intense workout. Can you talk about the value of some of that everyday activity, right? You mentioned like vacuuming the house or things like that, but there
Dancing
are,
in the kitchen.
right.
Yeah,
There's a lot of things we can do that in our
yeah,
normal day that, for a lot of people, just walking to their mailbox and back might be a workout,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're really starting from ground zero in terms of daily exercise, choose like 3 or 4 of your favorite Taylor Swift songs and put them on a playlist and just dance in the kitchen with your kids, especially also if you're just cramped for time and you haven't figured out how to make exercise fit in
Yeah.
the chaos of your schedule. Just do it right there in the living room. It doesn't have to be crazy. And we also underestimate the value of walking.
Hmm.
I walk my dog twice a day for 30 to 40 minutes. And I still underestimate the value of walking. When I get back from those dog walks, sometimes like I'm out of breath and I'll say to my husband, like, whoa, that was a workout. It was
Yeah.
just the walk we do every day. And I just can't imagine, like, man, what if I didn't do those walks every day? Like my insulin needs to go up, the amount of calories I burn in a day would go up. I would just have that much heart, my energy would go down. You know what I mean? Like it's just a mental
Yeah.
boost. So even if you can just carve out 20 minutes for a walk, just try that. Start small. Does not have to be CrossFit, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
love
in
that.
some perhaps it shouldn't be. Like,
Yeah. That's funny. Well, I love the approach of just being kind to yourself, being gentle to yourself, and start small, right? If you don't need to jump 2 feet into the deep end with exercise. It's probably
you never have to build your way up to a CrossFit workout. It's
yeah,
not necessary. And a lot of those people end up injured anyway. And so they're in physical therapy and they're not exercising right now.
yeah,
Just just be kind to yourself and go for that walk.
yeah. I love that. So you also shared that you just launched a new YouTube channel. Tell us a little bit about that. It's very exciting.
My new YouTube channel is called Diabetes Nerd. You go to youtube.com/at diabetes nerd. You'll find me. I am just going to try to explain as much as I can about every type of diabetes every week. And you'll find 5 videos there so far. I don't know when Scott publishes this. Maybe there'll be 10 by the time this is published, which would be awesome, right? And I just really want to continue explaining diabetes in a resource everybody can access and keeping it light and fun and supportive with 100% compassion for how hard any type of diabetes is. And, it doesn't have to come from some stiff old doctor in a white coat.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's, as I mentioned earlier, you have a gift for teaching complicated things in a very easy to understand and digestible way. Please keep writing your books, keep making videos. I love that you created your YouTube channel. I think that's really great. Is there anything that I haven't asked about that you wanted to be sure to bring up today?
Give yourself a pat on the back for making it through another day. You're doing awesome. I don't care what your A1C is.
I
You're
love that.
killing it.
I love that. Yeah, well done. Well done. Well, I will link your website where you can find all of Ginger's books. She has a lot of them and they're all great. So buy them all, read them all. Um, Although I'll skip the pregnancy one. That one, there's certain things that just, although, hey, if you're,
You're so close minded, Scott.
I know, but it's good to learn about. And then I'll also link your YouTube channel. Go subscribe and check out the great videos. It's just great. And Ginger, congratulations on the success and thank you so much for sharing yourself with us and helping us live diabetes in a better way.
Thank you, Scott. I look forward to getting your blog emails when they come out because that is genuine real life diabetes. So thank you for being so genuine.
My pleasure. My pleasure. All right. Thank you everyone for watching and we'll be back again soon with another wonderful guest.